So technically there is not much difference. But human beings alone can and should think, who am I? What is the purpose of this existence? Is there something beyond this body? Is there something beyond the sensory objects, sensory enjoyments? Is there something beyond all this? Something which is eternal? Something we should aspire for? This question can be asked only by human beings. That is the line of demarcation between the animal kingdom and human beings. Now, Sri Ramakrishna always used to insist, ask this question as to who you are. There should be a higher spiritual motive, and that alone can give us eternal peace. Yam's unique fortune was that he got this new spiritual ideal from Sri Ramakrishna. You have to remember, for all practical purposes, Yam was quite a big man, a member of the elite of the society. He was not very rich, of course, but as a school headmaster, he must have had enough to support his family, although he was not a luxurious man, not a rich man in any way. He had big prestige. He was a member of the Brahma Samaj, an elite Hindu reform movement of those days. He was considered to be one of the elite of society. He was close to Keshav Chandra Sen, who was a prominent social reformer of the times. He had everything, but something was wanting, lacking within him. So in fact, the absence of that higher spiritual value took him close to the jaws of death, self-destruction. He was thinking of committing suicide. And that tragic thought took him to Sri Ramakrishna. And instead of putting an end to his physical life, he began a new chapter in his spiritual life. That's what he is narrating here, his first visit to Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshinamurti temple. And they went straight to Sri Ramakrishna's room, that they found him seated on a wooden cot facing the east. With a smile on his face, he was talking of God. The room was full of people, all seated on the floor, drinking in his words in deep silence. Yam stood there speechless and looked on. It was as if he was standing where all the holy places met, and as Shukadeva himself was speaking the word of God, or as if Sri Chaitanya was singing the name and the glories of Lord. Yam looked around him with wonder and said to himself, what a beautiful place, what a charming man, how beautiful his words are. In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna says that we need three things to lead a higher spiritual life. Of course, these ideas are stated in the 8th century spiritual classic written by Adi Shankaracharya himself. The name of the text is Viveka. We need three important characteristics or qualities. In Sanskrit, it's called Manishuttum, Mumukshuttum, Mahapurusha Samsreka. English, we can say first we should be born as a human being with proper intelligence, with the ability to discriminate between what is higher spiritual truths and what are secondary, transitory things. Then we need a strong desire to lead a higher life. As I said earlier, we should be able to look beyond the fleeting, the sensory objects around us. We need many things in this world. An ordinary human being may need his home, he may need money and so on. But you should also realize that there is something beyond this, which alone can give him or her lasting peace and harmony of mind. And the third important characteristic is called Mahapurusha Samsreka. In simple language, we can say association with spiritually enlightened people. Because in spiritual life, there is one simple secret. We may read any number of books. Our intellect may suddenly grasp some high ideas. And suddenly we may think, well, these are wonderful things. We often may delude ourselves into thinking that what we intellectually pursue have become a reality in our experience, which may not be the truth. Intellectually, the idea may be very satisfying, very satisfactory, very elevating, very ennobling. But mind may be at a very low level. So very often, we may mistake what we perceive intellectually to be something that we experience mentally, which may not be the truth. So there is a gap between mind, or where the mind stands, and where the intellect stands. This gap had to be bridged. And this is possible only when we meet spiritually elevated people who themselves share some of these inner experiences. And this is technically called in Sanskrit Mahapurusha Samsraya. Mahapurusha means spiritually enlightened people. Mean association with spiritually enlightened people. That alone can give us an inner conviction that spirituality is not just a doctrine. It is not just a word. It is something real. It is something that we can experience in our life. Now, Yam was, remember, I have to take you back to Yam's psychological landscape. Yam was fully familiar with all the great spiritual ideas. Mind you, in Yam's life, it is stated that many of the Unitarian ministers and many of the prominent Anglican clergymen of Kolkata used to admire his scholarship in biblical literature. Yam was an outstanding scholar in biblical literature. Yam was quite familiar with Gita and Upanishads, Ramayana and so on. All the great spiritual literature available in Sanskrit language and also maybe in English language. So, what Yam was looking for was association with a real human being who has little bit of this inner experience. And that was precisely what he got when he met Sri Ramakrishna for the first time. So that's a third important characteristic need in spiritual life. Unless we get a glimpse of this experience dimension, no spiritual doctrine, no spiritual ideal can give us complete conviction. We may get intellectual conviction, but there again, as I said earlier, intellectual conviction is only skin deep. When it becomes an emotional, a mental conviction, it goes deeper, because mind goes deeper than intellect, so far as human life is concerned. Then Yam himself continues what he experienced as he left Sri Ramakrishna's room after his first visit. As he left the room with Siddhu, his nephew, he heard the sweet music of the evening service arising in the temple from gong, bell, drum, and cymbal. The sounds traveled over the Ganga, floating away and losing themselves in the distance. Yam was some kind of a he was a literary man, so he writes in his own poetic language as to what he experienced with him. Now, later on, this disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, Yam, became a source of help and guidance to many of Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples. Many of Sri Ramakrishna's most prominent disciples happened to visit him because of Yam, because Yam guided them. Yam was a headmaster, and many of them were his students. So once Yam sums up his own role. He says, I am nobody. Yam writes about himself. But I live beside an ocean. And I keep a few pictures of that holy water with me. Yam says that Sri Ramakrishna's teachings constitute the ocean, and what he does is nothing but keeping a few glasses full of that holy water with him. When a guest comes, I offer that to him. That's the only thing he can offer. Left to himself, he is nobody. But he lives beside an ocean because he had tried to imbibe the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, which constitute the ocean. What else am I to talk about? This is Yam's own estimate of his own role as the great evangelist and chronicler of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Now, I shall just go through a few portions of Sri Ramakrishna's Gospel, which will give us an idea as to how he used to instruct people. So, as I said earlier, the most unique characteristic of this text, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, is that it comes down to the level of common people living in this world, their common life situations, and slowly lift them to a higher level of spiritual consciousness. Whenever people came to him and openly told him that they did not believe in God, he never insisted that they should go and visit a temple. In fact, one of his most prominent non-monastic disciples was the famous Keshav Chandra Sen, who was a prominent leader of the Brahma Samaj of those days. He used to come to Dakshineshwar to meet Sri Ramakrishna with his followers. And he, after reaching there by boat, he would walk straight to Sri Ramakrishna's room. In Orthodox tradition, when you go to a temple or a church, the first thing that you are supposed to do, if you are a conventional believer, is to go and pray first, and then meet your friends and teachers. So anybody who comes to a temple normally is expected to go to the temple shrine first, pay obeisance, bow down, and then meet the teachers of the other spiritual holy men. But this man was a great intellectual and very proud of his being an intellectual, of course, and went straight to Sri Ramakrishna's room. Sri Ramakrishna used to discuss spirituality and philosophy with him, but never asked, go and bow down to the temple and come. He didn't do that. That shows he was so universal, so accessible. Because I often say, Sri Ramakrishna was not just a religious teacher. See, when you talk about somebody as being a religious teacher, you are talking about theology, you are talking about doctrines and dogmas. You are talking about do's and don'ts, theological doctrines and dogmas. Sri Ramakrishna was essentially a spiritual teacher. And spirituality goes beyond religions. Spirituality is universal. If you are spiritual, you can accept all the great spiritual teachers of the world with equal respect, with equal reverence. Or you should not reject anyone, you need not accept necessarily. But if you accept certain universal spiritual truths, you can be spiritual. As I said on many occasions earlier, Buddha, one of the greatest spiritual masters of the world, did not affirm in a creator God. Now, but Sri Ramakrishna becomes very practical, very realistic when he instructs spiritual devotees. Here's one example. For example, here Sri Ramakrishna says, when you take to spiritual life, you should have a strong will. spirituality or spiritual life is not meant for the weak, for the wavering. Spiritual life also is a life of confrontations and conflicts. In order to face them, you need inner strength and determination. Sri Ramakrishna gives a very interesting story here. Once there was a great drought in a country, and all the people were busy bringing water into their fields by digging canals. So he's speaking about a natural calamity. There was a big drought in a country. There was not enough water, no rains. So all the fields had gone dry. There was no way people could bring water from the river. There was no water at all. So it seems that one farmer, a man of strong determination, decided to dig a well. That's the story. So he went on working, and this man, he had decided to dig a deep well so that he could irrigate his field. And he went on working, and occasionally his people, his wife and children, used to come to the field where he was working hard under the blazing sun with food and water. The man would say, "No, I won't drink water, I won't eat meal before I have completed the work I have undertaken, digging the well." So, children came, then wife came, and finally he got furious. He threatened her, "No, you go away. If I stop working, then if there is no water, if there is no irrigation, and if there is no cultivation, who will feed your children? So you go away, I shall not return home till I have succeeded in finding water, in completing the work I have undertaken," meaning digging the well. And finally, till midnight, he worked, and he succeeded in digging the well, and he dug a canal, and the water started flowing to the field, and they had a wonderful crop, and they led a happy life. This is one story, giving an example. Then there is another story which Sri Ramakrishna says. Another peasant was also engaged in the same task, digging the well. But when his wife came and asked him to come home, he followed her without any protest, laying the instruments on his shoulder, saying, "Well, as you have come, I must go." And every day he will start his work trying to dig the well. And after some hours, wife and children will come, "No, you please stop, come home and take rest." Every day this happened, and he never succeeded in completing his task. He would say, "Well, you asked me to come, otherwise I would have completed this well." But he never succeeded. So what Sri Ramakrishna is driving home is, not only in secular life, but in spiritual life also, we may have to confront challenges and conflicts. Unless we have a strong iron will, we will not succeed in spiritual life. Incidentally, for those of you who are interested, in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which deals with the characteristics of an ideal devotee, Sri Krishna gives a list of qualities and characteristics essential for one to succeed in spiritual life. Santushta satatam yogi yatatma dridhanishchayaka. There also, Sri Krishna says, a strong iron will is necessary in leading a spiritual life. Mostly people fail because there is an element of hypocrisy in our mind, inner mind. We want spiritual life, there is no doubt, but we are not willing to put up enough effort for that. In a very secular field, we are ready to work hard to acquire the necessary qualification to succeed. But in spiritual life, patience and iron will, all these are essential. But very often, we are not willing to put up enough effort because the external world, we are facing more visible, gross obstacles. In spiritual life, we have to confront subtle, inner, invisible obstacles. So very often we do not have enough patience, so we do not succeed. So Sri Ramakrishna says, in spiritual life, we need a strong iron will and also patience to succeed in spiritual life. This is very interesting. It's a very, very simple flashbacks Sri Ramakrishna gives, glimpses into the working of our own mind. Again, sometimes Sri Ramakrishna says, sufferings in spiritual life, so suffering in material life may lead us to inner happiness. And initial success in material life may lead to spiritual tragedy. Very, very often in spiritual life, we have to face obstacles and problems at the material side. But these obstacles, these initial problems, tragedies, may be prelude to ultimate spiritual happiness and blissfulness. On the other hand, if you are deluded by the temptations of material success, it could take us to spiritual failure. So that's why there is a famous statement in some of our spiritual classics. The statement is this. After explaining, I shall just narrate the Sanskrit verse. Those who are interested could remember. The statement is this: God tells his devotees, well, those whom I really want to help in spiritual life, I want to bless in spiritual life, what do? I do not make them the richest in the world. I take away whatever wealth they have got. And not only that, I get them isolated from their friends and relatives. I give them plenty of problems and troubles, so that they will be forced to turn towards me, and that will help them to succeed in their spiritual life. Now, just think of Yam's life. Yam had just enough wealth, though he was not a wealthy or rich man, well educated, and was at a prominent place in society. But his family life was full of squabbles and problems. As I said at the beginning, one night he left his home in the company of his wife, as he later disclosed, with the thought of putting an end to his life. And this tragedy or near tragedy took him straight to the royal path, and he eventually became a great saint, a sage. You can find this in the lives of innumerable Christian mystics and saints, not only Vedantic tradition, but also in the Christian mystical tradition you find. And then sometimes people become very prominent, surrounded by schizophrenics, their admirers and courtiers and friends. When they are rich and wealthy and prominent, they will have all kinds of people around them to praise them, to follow them. And that could lead them away from spiritual path. So what God does, God isolates them. God wants to save them from themselves. That's why the Sanskrit sloka is, Yasya anugraham ichchami tasya vittam haramyaham bandhavaischa viyogena bhrisham bhavati dukkhidaha tena dukkhena samtapto yadimam na parityajet tam prasadam karishyami yat devairabi sudurlabham. It's a great spiritual principle, great spiritual truth that is enshrined in these Sanskrit verses, which you can find in the lives of every great spiritual man or woman who have made an attempt to turn to God, turn to higher life in the history of human civilization. So first I gave the example. If too much of wealth and money and power make a person proud, too proud to think of God, God, if he has got a soft corner for him, for his devotee, takes away all these obstacles. Turns him into a pauper. Not a very happy situation from a material point of view. From the highest spiritual point of view, the royal path to spiritual enlightenment. And then if you have friends and courtiers of, sycophants surround you, tempt you away from the path of God, path of spirituality. If God really wants to help you, He gets you isolated from them. So if you are isolated from such people, you should feel happy and you should thank God for that. You should not curse God. So if there is a collapse in this stock market, share market and banks, you should rather thank God. This mighty or merciful God, you have made me open my eyes to the reality that money is not everything. Money comes, money goes. Friends come, friends disappear. Then the next part of the verse says, still if you fix your mind on God, undaunted by these apparent misfortunes, then I shall elevate you into such a high position that you will be envy of even celestial beings. This is the meaning of the Sanskrit verse. So in the case of Yam, you can find this. Every misfortune, every tragedy, every bit of unhappiness was opening a new door. It was a new window, was taking him to a higher level in his spiritual evolution. So the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna is like an ocean. Whether you carry with you a small glass or a big jar or huge containers, you can get as much as you want and as much as we really aspire for. So thank you. This is a book which everyone should read, not only believers in God, but even non-believers. It is so universal. It appeals to everyone. It is not just a religious classic. It is essentially a universal spiritual classic. Thank you. Namaskar.